Really happy to be here. Hope you're enjoying VS Live and Las Vegas, getting a chance to enjoy Las Vegas in the evenings. Today I'm going to talk about Visual Studio, .NET, and the cloud. I really see this as actually building upon or as an extension to the keynote that James Conner did yesterday on Windows Azure. And so we're going to build upon what he talked about around the Windows Azure cloud and in the context of Office 365 and tfs.visualstudio.com. Now, in thinking about the cloud, kind of just stepping out of that for a second and thinking about the cloud, it's hard not to think about how far we've come just in 5 years. 5 years ago, if you think about it, actually Windows Azure did not exist. The team building Windows Azure did. Actually, I was on that team. The project was called Red Dog at the time. And I was working on the Visual Studio tools. But Windows Azure would not be released until PDC 2008, and actually it was released as a preview at that particular point in time, which was September of 2008. Office 365, it didn't exist either. Well, there was a forerunner to it called BPOS that really didn't gain the traction that we wanted. But we've gained a tremendous amount of traction with Office 365 since its release in June of 2011. Visual Studio 2008, that's the release about 5 years ago. It had a lot of server development, but really didn't talk about cloud development at all. So kind of a different landscape from 5 years ago to even today. Fast forward to today, what are we seeing? Well, we see Windows Azure and Office 365 are credible and established businesses. We see that Visual Studio 2012 has a cloud development story to it. But more importantly, the biggest difference that I see is actually in the customer conversations. The customer conversations have really changed. 5, 4, 3, 2 years ago even, it was always a question of if we move to the cloud. How can we leverage the cloud? Is it interesting? But really, fundamentally, a question of if. Today, the customer conversations have all changed to when. And yeah, there's some trickiness around hybrid and how do I integrate with my on-prem data centers and so on and so forth. But I think everybody recognizes that it's really just a matter of when. And for developers, what that means is we need to be knowledgeable and fluent in these cloud services. And so between yesterday and today, what I really want to do is make sure that you're fluent with the Windows Azure services, the Office 365 services, and the TFS services. Now, Office 365, many of you may not build for Office and SharePoint today. But with the release, the latest release, this 2013 wave of releases from Office and SharePoint, there's a new cloud app model that is much more approachable and applicable to a broader range of developers. And there are a number of services that you can start leveraging in your own app development. And so we'll go over that. So we're going to talk about Office 365. We're going to talk about how it builds upon Windows Azure. And together, you can leverage both services in your app development, both sets of services in your app development. We'll talk about Team Foundation services and the developer lifecycle management tools, or tools, services, capabilities that you can leverage from that. And the thing that's going to tie all this together is Visual Studio and .NET. So let's jump in and talk about this new cloud app model that I just talked about. We call them apps for Office and SharePoint. Sometimes we just use Office to cover both Office and SharePoint. Now, if you're an existing Office and SharePoint developer, fear not. The existing ways that you extend Office and SharePoint today will continue to be supported for the foreseeable future, actually. A big tenet of ours, of Office's, is really to support back compat for a long time. It's a really important thing. But at the same time, we've introduced a new cloud app model that we are pretty excited about and think that you will be excited about as well. And the way we think about this app model is, it's apps. And we all understand the value of apps when it comes to devices. You can add features and functionality to a particular device, right? But on top of that, it's not just adding features and functionalities to a device. It's having a standardized way to do that. From an IT standpoint, it's having a standardized way to manage that, govern that. From a developer standpoint or a business standpoint, you have a standard way to get apps out to your customers and a business model and a clear path to monetization. So we want to bring that set of concepts and value that you know in devices and bring that over to the apps that actually business and productivity users spend a ton of their time in. Outlook, Excel, Word. Now, we talk about Office 365, we talk about the cloud, and as Steve Guggenheimer mentioned yesterday in his Modern Apps Live session, or keynote, we always talk about cloud first now at Microsoft, and that's just the way we think about things. But that doesn't mean that we don't think about on-premises. It doesn't mean we don't support on-premises. On-premises is still super important. And so this app model is supported both on-premises and in O365, even though I'll primarily talk about it in the context of the cloud. It's a web standards-based model. So it embraces web technologies like HTML, JavaScript, REST OData, OAuth. At the same time, it embraces .NET on the server, and we think the premier solution is to use ASP.NET and .NET on the server to develop these types of apps. So what kind of app model is an app model without having an app store, right? And so we have two app stores. We have a public app store, as well as an app catalog, which is internal and private to your company, which you can actually use to build and deploy solutions out to your end users without making it public, as well as bringing down some apps from the public store and distributing them out to your users as well. But there's a couple different opportunities with a store in the context of more of a business productivity scenario. One is you can leverage off-the-shelf solutions that your business may need. Great. But as a developer, you also now have a different type of store to sell to. It's a corporate store. It's a store that not only will attract a consumer audience, but also a corporate one. And that represents a new opportunity. And finally, as I've kind of mentioned here, you have a single way to distribute these apps out internally and publicly, but internal and public apps out to your company. And your users have a single unified way to access those apps, use those apps, regardless of whether they were from the public store or the internal app catalog. Now, just so we're on the same page about this wave of releases and what I'm talking about today, this is all available now, although it's all pretty new. So the Office 2013 clients were made available in January, Excel, Word, Outlook, so on and so forth. The new Office 365, which is essentially the 2013 wave of Office, was made available, general availability, in February, actually end of February, February 27th of 2013. And the Office Developer Tools for Visual Studio, which is an add-in to Visual Studio that allows you to develop for these apps for Office and SharePoint, was RTW'd in March of 2013. Earlier this month, actually it was March 4th, is when we made that available. So this is all available now. Okay, with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about apps for Office. We'll build one together. We'll talk a little bit about apps for SharePoint. We'll build one together. And then we'll talk about the lifecycle and management monitoring capabilities that are built into this app model that I think you'll find interesting as well. So kind of a high-level agenda there. So apps for Office. And when I talk about apps for Office here, I'm talking about extending Outlook and Excel and Word and PowerPoint and Project and so on. There are three shapes that you can use to extend these Office applications. One is a task pane app, where the app is actually adjacent to the document, sits alongside of it. You can think about it as adding capabilities into the application itself. So for example, in Word, you want a dictionary. You can get an app from Merriam-Webster's, which extends Word to have the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. And you can see that there's interaction with the document. You highlight a word, it will show up in the dictionary. Another example, a little more sophisticated from our friends at LegalZoom, allows you to create a legal document right from within Word using their functionality in their task pane. And you can then send it off for legal review. Then there's content apps, where instead of adding functionality to the hosting application, you're actually adding functionality to the document itself. And so a canonical example, actually two canonical examples, is really around binding to data in, say, for example, Excel or in a table, and then visualizing that data. Here's an app that does a heat map over the United States, the different states. And here's one that does kind of a similar thing, but with bubbles showing different sizes. And actually, we'll build that one together here today, and we'll do different size bubbles based on stock prices. Then there's mail apps. And mail apps kind of are task pane apps in a way in that, well, instead of vertical, they're horizontal. But they differ from task panes in a key way. Well, one, they're in Outlook. And two, they're based on the context of a particular mail or appointment. So what you're not seeing here, and the text is highlighted, it says, can we get together next Thursday at 2 p.m.? Now, Exchange actually goes and parses all the text and creates entities from it based on various rules that it has. And one of the entities it creates is to say that in this mail is an appointment request. And so LiquidSpace built an app that essentially activates based on the fact that this type of text shows up in the body of the email document, and then offers up the ability to book a room, which is totally contextual. And so you can imagine another canonical case of UPS doing this, where if you have a tracking code in your body of your email, then you show up a map of where that particular package is and estimated time of arrival and so on. Another example, LinkedIn has an app. It's kind of a fun one. A lot of times you want a little more context on the people that you're communicating to. And LinkedIn makes it really easy for you to pull in some profile information for the people on your mail and actually just scan through it, which is can be kind of fun in a creepy stalker kind of way. And then the other thing that you can do is combine these apps together. Now, I showed you more of a one or this, kind of this or that, build a single app. But here we built, for the last Olympics in London, we built a medal tracker app that has 3 apps for Office in it and a bunch of Excel data that gets updated by one of the apps. So every time you open this app day by day during the Olympics, you'd get an updated set of data in the middle in Excel showing the current medal counts. On the left, there's an app for Office that currently is showing just a summary, but as you drilled into the states, or sorry, into the countries, you would actually see the breakdown for each one of those countries, top athletes, and so on and so forth. And when you did that, on the right top, you got the bubbles visualization showing where most of the medals were coming from. And it turns out the US is good at swimming. And on the lower right, you actually get a map showing bubbles overlaid on a map showing essentially where the countries that are getting the most medals are showing up. So that combines up together to create this kind of bigger solution. Now, well, I could put that all on a web page, and wouldn't that be the same thing? It's probably a totally valid question. Well, actually, one of the key benefits here is that section in the middle is just Excel. So you're mashing up some web data and web visualizations with Excel, meaning that I can now perform Excel things on that data. I can add conditional formatting on the medals. I can do calculations. I can bring up charts and other visualizations that Excel supports. And that's the real power here. It's the power of combining Excel and Office capabilities with your own capabilities. And it allows people to stay in the apps they're already in, instead of having to bounce around from app to app to app. Apps for Office, and as you'll see, apps for SharePoint, are actually very simple in concept. They consist of a web page and a manifest. Yeah, the web page is hosted on a web server, and you probably have more than just a single web page. You have a whole web project. But essentially, you have an app manifest that describes to the store what the app is. And in that app manifest, there's a URL out to where this web page is located. And together, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Project, are able to bring up an app by loading up that web page in the context of essentially an embedded IE inside their application. So with that, let's actually look at building one of these. And I mentioned we're going to build out a stock Bubbles app. So let's go do that. And I'm actually not going to use Visual Studio at a Visual Studio conference. I'm going to use a product we call Napa. It's a code name. And we'll talk about that more in a second. So the place to get started with these apps for Office and SharePoint is dev.office.com. And here I'm showing it to you. The key thing that you can do from here is click on this big start tile, and I'll show you a couple of things that you can do, but is get a developer site. Now, a developer site actually is more than just a site. It's actually a developer O365 sandbox. So what you get with that is a little bit of Link, Exchange, SharePoint. You get the Office clients. And that creates your own sandbox where you can do development. and not mess up, say, your corporate's O365, or if your corporation is not yet on O365, where you don't have the access that you need, you actually can control that yourself and do development. So the developer site is free for 30 days. It's $99 for the rest of the year. It's a benefit of the MSDN subscription if you have one of those. And again, it includes all that capability for you. But it is free for 30 days, so you can give it a try. One of the things that you get in that developer subscription is a dev site, which is actually a site on SharePoint that's customized for developers. So there's a few things that you see here. This is a great place where I can actually deploy to, test, and so on. But I actually have, as the first tile, is some tools right in the browser that we call Napa. Now, we don't anticipate that Napa will replace Visual Studio. That's not it at all. But what I am showing you is that without installing any software, you can get started very quickly and easily with these apps for Office and SharePoint. Maybe you're not a Visual Studio user. Well, you can use Napa to get started. Maybe you are a Visual Studio user, but you don't want to install the add-in yet. You're not sure about whether you're going to build these apps for Office and SharePoint. Well, just use Napa. You can get a full idea of what you can do with these apps, and then you can seamlessly transition to Visual Studio, which I'll show you later. So we're going to create a content app for Excel. We'll call it Bubbles. And what you'll see is you get a Visual Studio type experience here, where we have some buttons on the left. We have the solution right here. You see colorization in the editor. I can click on things. You see that I get some token highlighting and so on. We have tag matching. But a little more interesting is I'll switch to app.js. And you can see here that I also get that kind of colorization capability here.